Welcome. This is Leading with Spirit, the show that gives you an in-depth look at topics like what it takes to navigate your spiritual journey, how to heal yourself and grow your spiritual gifts, and balanced practices to expand your business and your spiritual leadership. I'm your host, Spirit Bird, shamanic teacher, healer, and author, here to guide you on your journey to becoming your most potent spiritual leader. I didn't know I could feel like this. That's a statement most commonly made after a spiritual embodiment experience. If you're a healer, coach, or psychedelic facilitator, you're going to want to hear this. On this episode today, we're talking with Kate Tompkins about embodied healing. We're going to deep dive into the techniques for accessing and navigating the wisdom held within your body. You'll also learn what proper integration is and why it's the key to unlocking the full potential of your plant medicine experiences. And we'll delve into the world of shamanic embodiment and its role in empowering healers to trust their intuition, hold space, and facilitate profound transformation. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce you to Kate Tompkins. Actually, I am very fascinated with her work and some of the magic she brings forward in her shamanic work and in her coaching. And I actually found out recently, instead of reading your bio, I'd love to just share a little bit about what I know about you naturally, and then we can get into those specifics. But I learned recently that one of the things that opened the door for you to, I guess, maybe just spiritual work in general was a pole dancing class. Is that correct?
That is correct, believe it or not.
Yeah. Well, I do a little bit. I was already doing the spiritual work for a long time, but I took a burlesque class last year for fun and to just help, free up a different part of me. And so I can see, how valuable it was. And I remember one moment the instructor had, it happened to be all women, all of the women, staring in the mirror and barely have any clothes on and really just like said all these like words of affirmation and worth. And like half of the class was crying. But anyway, so I'd actually love to hear a little bit about that and what it sparked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wouldn't say that it started out as a spiritual journey in the beginning, but it definitely opened the door for me. And I think whenever I started, my initial goal or desire in signing up for my first pole dancing class was that I wanted to feel sexy. And I did not know how to do that. And I was in my late teens, early 20s, and out on my own for the first time. And I was experiencing attention from, other people. And I didn't know how to accept it or receive it. And I found out about pole dancing, and luckily I live in Austin, Texas, and there were a multitude of options to learn pole dancing. And through that journey, I found not only was I becoming more aware of my body, it was also healing parts of me. Those things, just like you shared, looking in the mirror at very little clothing on my body and being seen in that space and being seen as strong and worthy and capable was incredibly empowering. And eventually I recognized that I wanted to heal more, and I wanted to feel as good outside of the dance studio as I did inside the dance studio. And that led me to receiving my coaching certification in sex, love, and relationships. And 4.5 million rabbit holes later, I find myself in Shaman School and experiencing different plant medicines. And I absolutely can see that thread going all the way back to those days pole dancing. And I still teach pole dancing as well, actually, which is one of my favorite parts of my day, my weeks.
Oh, wonderful. So if anybody's in Austin, there's a little plug for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so amazing. I've always find it interesting, like what actually opens things up for people And it's so common to be, like I think we overcomplicate it. And a lot of times it's those like little simple desires that have so much more attached to them than we realize.
Absolutely.
So, and one of the things that strikes me about your work, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is I feel like you have a specialty in navigating the body and self-love and that connection. And is that something that you feel like you struggled with most of your life, or is that gotcha?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as I was getting my certification as a sex, love, and relationship coach, it's very much based in being in your body. It took me probably 9 months in that program before I was able to feel my body for the first time. And I absolutely broke down in tears. And I really thought whenever I signed up for that program that there was something wrong with me and that I was actually getting the certification only to help other people do a thing that I thought I was incapable of. So I think that my experience in having such a struggle and having such a deep belief that it was not possible for me to feel my body in certain ways gives me a special ability to help other people, because I think actually a lot of people and a lot of women really struggle to get out of their heads and actually experience their bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what led you had already gotten your certification, you've been working with people. What made that transition from the body work and the Tantra work into shamanic work?
I would say there were a couple different pieces. My first was probably my first plant medicine ceremony as a participant. And I went into that really unknowing. Like I didn't know anything about plant medicine. I was primarily sober. I had not experienced a lot of anything in my life. I didn't even really drink a lot of alcohol. And that kind of shifted my perspective on what was available out there. And I recognized my work shifting, I guess, a little bit right before that, that I wasn't using the frameworks of my coaching modality as much, and I was using a lot more of journeying through people's bodies, although I didn't have the language at the time to recognize that that's what I was doing. Uh, and so through working with plants and continuing to do my work in a way that was more unique to me as opposed to copying this framework that I knew, led me to just kind of create this system of journeying through the body that I was recognizing felt really good to me, really good to my clients. And then I've read a book called Walking in Light. I should know the author, but I don't. I will get that. And the piece that really clicked it in for me, that opened the door for me to be able to experience Shaman School, was her describing that there were always shamans in every lineage. And I think I had had a block around being a white American who doesn't even really know my heritage to call myself a shaman. And once I understood what a shaman was traditionally, and that every culture in the world had shamans in it at one point, I recognized that it was something that I could explore, and I had permission to open that door. And then when I started learning more about shamanism, I was like, oh, I'm already doing this. And that felt like a really special moment of permission. And I think I needed it to happen in that order in order for me to trust that it was available to me personally. Similar to the coaching work, I had to kind of get my foot in the door and then recognize something about myself in order for it to like fully land with me.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, absolutely. I've had that experience before as well, like on both ends of it, where I put myself in a group and realized, oh, it like is an instant confidence boost because it's like, oh, actually, I am much further along than what's happening
Yeah.
here. But it's still good to be in those environments and learn how to navigate that and work with other people. And
Mhm.
conversely, I've put myself in situations where, I'm kind of at the most beginner level in the group,
Mhm.
which is challenging and also really good,
Yeah.
obviously for growth as well.
Yeah. I think with my coaching work, I was like way beginner and very disconnected from my body. And with the shaman work, I was a little bit more developed than I thought I was. I came in thinking I was a beginner and recognizing in myself that I had already been doing this work for a couple years.
Mm-hmm. And that's really common also with shamanic work where, in my opinion, it's natural part of being human. And of course, some people are going to come into this life with those capacities or gifts opened up a little bit more. And there's going to be other people that don't really have them open. And of course, people can learn them. And there are also people who just sort of have these natural tendencies. But what a lot of us are missing is the context and the language
Yes.
and the worldview and the understanding and a framework for how to use it in your life or in your work. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think one of the ways that I've settled with it in my body is that shamanism is essentially a type of storytelling. And storytelling is part of what makes us human. And it is part of why the human race has thrived, is that we are able to tell stories and to share stories and to hand down stories. And I think that, you know, I've experienced people who doubt that they're going to be able to go on a guided journey, but everybody knows story and everybody can follow story. And it might take a little bit more practice for some people than others, but I think we all have this ability to experience story in our body, which is how I perceive journeying to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm excited to dive into a little bit more of that in a minute.
Yeah,
So you recently finished shaman school. How are you feeling now? What's different for you now?
I miss it. What's different for me now? I really feel like it developed a lot of trust in my abilities, a lot of trust and a lot of confidence and a lot of clarity. I think one of my favorite things about my experience before versus after is that I have a better ability to understand when I'm giving reflections to people in a journey. I feel like I know better if it is something that's like mine that I'm bringing to the table versus something that they're bringing to the table, and really having permission for it to be either or both at the same time. Like I feel more free to give a reflection without necessarily needing it to be for them. And just like knowing that those are almost like offerings that I'm placing on the table and empowering my clients and participants to only pick up what resonates in their body. And I think it's also teaching my clients how to understand what resonates in their body. And I think that that's a really special moment.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I love the way you describe that. These little
Yeah.
blessings, little gifts for now, for the
Yeah.
future. Mm-hmm.
Take it or leave it. This is what's coming through right now.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
were you already working with plant medicine before shaman school? I mean, I know you were at least working with
Yes.
it for yourself. Tell me a little bit more
With
about
yeah, only I think only for myself. I had just recently started holding ceremonies of my own in my last like 3 months of shaman school.
that. Mhm. Got it. Yeah. So I would love to talk about, I think, plant medicine and the body in particular. And I'll share a piece for me that's significant here. And as you know, we work with the different shamanic archetypes in shaman school, and there's lots of different versions of how to identify people's energy and what's needed and that kind of thing. What I have noticed often with plant medicine, for a lot of people that are really either in their head or haven't had a lot of experience with like a spiritual connection. Maybe they're kind of disconnected from their intuition. They sort of have trouble letting go and trusting that. They maybe haven't had an opportunity to really feel what it's like to converse with spirits, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Oftentimes plant medicine is really helpful for that, for like allowing you to sort of let go and surrender and open those channels.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people who are the opposite. And I was one of those where I was like, that channel was blown wide the fuck open. And so I found myself initially with some of my plant medicine experiences finding working with facilitators that like only knew or understood plant medicine is like opening up those channels to connect to
Hmm.
spirit or to see aliens or like all of the like fireworks that a lot of people talk about, which is super cool, which of course you don't need plant medicine for, but it's also a wonderful tool. And so
Yes.
for me, what I learned from my journey, which is not over with plant medicine, is actually it was teaching me not that direction, but how to get into my body.
Hmm.
Yeah, so completely
Yeah.
different direction. And so I'd love to
Hmm.
hear, let me hear what you got.
Yeah. I think that this is something that I recognized really early on, maybe at my first plant medicine ceremony, is that I think one of the reasons that plant medicine resonated so well in my body is that I knew how to be in my body. And I don't think I had the words for it right away, but it was in hearing the stories of the people that were in ceremony with me that didn't have that skill. They they did, I think, come with an expectation that they would, be able to have these experiences of flying with dragons, or seeing the pretty things and the lights and the colors and the sunshine and the rainbows. And then they had a very different experience. Either they were very shut down or their experience was a little bit more uncomfortable. And then they felt really disappointed and like they didn't get it. And I think that for me, my ability to be in my body and to journey in my body really helped me work with the plants. So it wasn't like the plants were taking me out into the universe. It was the plants were helping me see in my body who I was and what I needed and where I needed healing still. And the things that were uncomfortable in my journeys, I knew how to work through them, even if I didn't know how to work through them. It's like the plants helped me move things that I would not have necessarily known how to move through on my own.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what do you, for folks that maybe have heard, practitioners and spiritual people talk about being in their body, not being in their body, but they don't really understand really what that means. I'm curious, in your opinion, like how would people notice they're not in their body? What would be happening in their life that would suggest that?
That is such a good question. The number one thing for me that I recognized is that I was often dissociating when things got really intense. So, in my experience, in my practice, emotions are sensational, meaning you feel emotions in your body. So if you are avoiding your emotions or you don't know how to process your emotions, if whenever big emotions come up, you go into fight, flight, or freeze response, you just want to run away from your partner instead of having that conversation, or you just shut down completely, I think that that's a really good sign that you are not fully able to experience your body right now. And it's a very good thing for a lot of people for a long time. These things don't happen by accident, and they're not villains. It's not a bad thing for you to not be in your body. A lot of times it is a trauma response. It is your body's way of keeping you safe. And unfortunately, it usually happens to us when we're children. We develop these responses, and then in adulthood, they just feel like our new normal. So it can be really difficult to recognize, am I in my body? Am I in my head? But I think that those are really good cues. If you're actively avoiding your emotions, then I think that that's one of the biggest signs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I was just reflecting myself and what I think what I think I noticed for me and that has been most significant as far as like how it's helped change my life is being kind of like a sensitive person anyway, being sort of empathic anyway. The struggle for me was having trouble discerning like who I was and what was actually mine, what was actually my thoughts, and maybe even more importantly, like sticking to them. And
Yeah.
so that was part of the process for me and also like a scary part of the journey. And I still navigate that is like, oh God, well, if I actually attach to this truth that I hold in me, that's really scary.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it also has been one of the biggest changes in my life in that, I'm able to hold others, in more integrity and, more clarity. I'm able to be in a healthier relationship with my partner.
Mhm.
I'm able to hold my own when it's needed, and I'm still have the flexibility to look at myself and, do the shadow work when that's called for as well. And
Absolutely.
actually, on that note, I noticed this might be another thing to recognize for folks that are listening if maybe they're not in their body. And I'm so glad, Kate, that you shared that piece of like, it's not like you're wrong or you like messed it up
Mhm.
or you're broken, right? Because everybody
Yeah.
has a different version of this and everybody has a version of this too. But I found, or I was just noticing that for a lot of folks that I've worked with, I'm curious if you see this too. Oftentimes, if you find yourself in a behavior that maybe gets called out or maybe you get frustrated with, and you find yourself thinking, well, that's just the way I am. I feel like that is
Mhm.
also a really good sign that there's something actually that can move here. If you find yourself sort of doubling down on this thing that isn't quite working or that causes
Yeah.
friction. Have you
Mhm.
experienced that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that as part of the flight response, or sorry,
Mhm.
part of the fight response. Like very rigid stubbornness around an identity piece is a little bit in that realm of fight, and it's a protective mechanism. So yeah, I absolutely have seen that over and over again.
So what do you think from your experience and from the folks that you've worked with, what do you see as really the benefits of doing this work of getting in their body and developing that self-love piece?
I think some of the bigger pieces, so a lot of my work in this area has been around accepting emotions and allowing emotions more fully. And the benefit of it is a huge, huge stress reliever. I think that since most of us have carried around these emotions for so long and avoided our emotions for so long, they really build up energetically in our body. And even though it's our normal day-to-day state, we don't recognize how much energy it actually takes to hold back those emotions. You might be really fucking good at it, and I fully believe that, but that doesn't mean that it's not taking up effort. So I see over and over again that when people start to liberate their emotional body and start to be able to hear their body and communicate with their body just as well as they communicate with their mind. So, having those conversations in your mind versus having those conversations with your body, I feel like they open themselves up to healthier relationships and better communication with their own children and setting better boundaries with their parents or their in laws or their boss. I feel like they no longer feel guilty about being who they are. And I think that is the biggest gift in itself.
Mm, love it. I want to talk a little bit more about working with psychedelics, I also want to just name that even though we're going to talk about that, that you offer coaching without the use of that. And I just like to reiterate that because I know plant medicines are like the hot thing. I'm glad they are. It's
Hmm.
a whole shit show with that as well. And so I just want to name that because it's very easy to, especially with our dominant American mentality, to like view it as, a pill or a thing that will fix something that's wrong. Um,
Hmm.
and one of the reasons that I like working both ways. I love working without them and I love working with them. One of the reasons I like working without them is because there's a way that we can integrate a little bit more seamlessly and you don't have to use them. So if you're somebody who doesn't really resonate with them or doesn't feel called to them, there's this amazing option. Now, if you're someone who does resonate and you are interested, but you're not really sure, I'm curious what you would recommend for them.
Yeah, I'll even add to that real quick is that
Mhm.
I do work coaching without plant medicine as my primary way to work with people. I think it's incredibly empowering to know that it's all you
Yes.
doing
Ooh,
your healing,
yes.
right? Yes. And also, I don't offer plant medicines without coaching.
Yes.
So it's more of the core for me personally that you know how to communicate with your body before you go into those experiences. So they definitely go hand in hand. And that's not always the case whenever you sign up for a plant medicine experience. So it's always good to check in with what experience you're going into as to what is the preparation and the aftercare for that integration experience. But if you are curious, I think the best thing you can do to help yourself find clarity is talk to somebody directly who has experienced that particular plant, and preferably not the person that is hosting the ceremony itself. And this will just give you the least bias in that conversation. It's obviously a good idea to also talk to the person hosting the ceremony eventually. But if you're at the stage where you're just kind of curious, but not totally sure, I think talking to somebody who has experienced that kind of ceremony will be the best tell. And if you are connected to your body or your intuition, you might just feel a yes or a no in your body. And it's a little bit difficult to describe what that feels like if you don't feel your body, but it's along the lines of trust your gut. And I think a lot of people understand that language enough to be like, okay, my gut is telling me that maybe I should go explore this opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll add to that also that if you are considering a plant medicine experience and you haven't ever received coaching or healing work, do that first. Yes, absolutely. And for most folks that offer plant medicine integration, they should also be able to hold you before the plant medicine process as well. And I'd love
Yes.
to hear more from you on so that's another phrase. Plant medicine integration is a very popular phrase. Obviously, it's very important. There's a lot of people that specialize in that popping up. And I'm curious for you, but again, for people that haven't worked with plant medicine, like what the fuck does that even mean? Like plant medicine integration, what is integration even? So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Plant medicine integration, for me, I usually describe it as like helping to put the puzzle pieces together. I think one thing that surprised me in my first few ceremonies was that as you're in a plant medicine experience, it often feels very vivid and very clear. But you experience a lot depending on the type of medicine that you're working with. You can experience a very vast range of experiences. And then whenever you come back to a normal state of consciousness, sometimes it's hard to remember your journey. And a lot of times in the weeks following, the integration can actually help you remember. And the integration can help you make sense of things because it is a very abstract experience that you're going to have. It's not going to be something like a movie or a memory where you can clearly understand what happened. A lot of times it's a lot more vague than that. So it's the plant medicine integration can help take an abstract journey and help you apply it to your everyday life. And I have found in my own journeys where I didn't have great integration experiences, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, I felt like I had just forgotten everything, and this experience had just slipped right through my fingers. And although I truly believe that my body always is going to remember that experience, I think it's a lot more, I think it honors the medicine best if you can actually take the lessons and apply them to your life, as opposed to having a closed experience that just exists as an experience.
Absolutely. Actually just spoke with a acquaintance of mine recently who had worked with plant medicine for a long time and then had a big experience. And it's common to have big experiences. It doesn't happen, well, every time you're going to get something really valuable, but how you experience it will be different. And I share this a lot, but I find that folks oftentimes who have done maybe one or two ceremonies, have done a couple of plant medicine experiences. Maybe they've been wonderful. Obviously, plant medicine can also, not hard as in suffering, but challenging as in it's going to challenge you to grow. And oftentimes, if you've had just a couple, or depending on the plants you're working with or the group you're working with, you might be really like fuzzy and warm and fireworks and lovely. And what I've found has happened for a lot of folks is they do like 1 or 2 years of plant medicine experience and it tends to hang around that space. And then from there, they're either like, wow, this is amazing. I'm gonna be a facilitator. And then they pass out mushrooms and then they give somebody a psychotic break and they haven't actually seen the full spectrum of what happens in a healing journey. And then as you get to like year 2 or maybe 3, it starts to go into a different layer. And again, really beautiful opportunity. Like I think this is where the biggest growth really happens. And it is challenging. And so folks sometimes don't realize, again, the full spectrum of where it can go. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So I was speaking to an acquaintance of mine who had spent quite a few years with it. However, it was always with the same group that was really great at the opening and the connection, but not so great at the next piece. And he was ready for the next piece. And not only was it not available for him in that group, but the integration wasn't fully formed either. And so we had this really big, actually a really powerful experience, but the practitioners didn't know what was happening for him. They had no idea what he was experiencing. And actually, I thought of him because, you mentioned integration will often bring the pieces back. And sure enough, I mean, him just sharing a couple parts of it, I could tell exactly from what he described, exactly what was happening for him. And what was happening is he was getting in his body.
Yeah.
And it was very scary for him, right? And then also to be held by people that didn't understand what was happening. And also from even just the short conversation where we could actually integrate these pieces, he started to remember other parts of that ceremony. They started coming together and basically, not saying he doesn't have like some more work and integration to do, but basically 2 years of kind of being confused and a little bit stuck in the trauma of it had vanished. And that is the power of integration for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's one of my favorite things about plant medicine is that done correctly and with proper integration, things that you've struggled with your whole life, maybe even subconsciously, can just go. They can just go. It is such a beautiful moment of like like, yeah, that that is the thing. That's the piece that I needed. And a lot of times it's that one conversation that can pull all of that together for you, but the conversation needs to be had. Absolutely.
Mhm. So I have, I think, two more questions for you.
Mhm.
We'll see. I'm curious, just from your experience working with plant medicines, I'm curious if you could share, I don't know, a story that from your experience that surprised you or was an interesting teaching.
Oh man, so
I,
many.
I know.
Um, so many.
What jumps out to you?
Um, I think, let's see here. One of my favorite experiences in plants that I like to share this because it's not a sunshine and rainbows experience, but it is still one of my favorite experiences. And it was, not sure if we need a trigger warning here, but it was a experience of healing my womb space, of all of the unborn children in my family lineage back to the beginning of time. And it was such a powerful experience where I birthed these little black pearls that were all strung together, and I was able to open a hole in the earth and return these little souls back to the earth. And I've never given birth. And I was very against having children for a long time due to some trauma that I experienced growing up. And having this experience was one of the ones where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but my body knows what it's doing, and I'm just going to trust it. And I was able to process these little souls and clear them from my body and clear them from my lineage. And it was not pleasant. It was quite emotionally overwhelming, as you can imagine. But to come to the other side, where having released all of that grief and feeling a sense of pride in my body that I was strong enough to carry that for my family and to be the one to close all of those chapters that were left lingering was just it was such an incredible experience of what I was capable of as a woman and as a human.
Mhm. Ooh, full body chills on a couple of those. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
I'm just going to give it a pause a second and let all of that land.
yeah. Mhm.
Mhm. Great. Yeah. So I'm backtracking a little bit, but this piece came
Mhm.
through. You mentioned, uh, that the integration process and honoring the plants, and it struck me. I've been diving into my Slavic heritage, as you know, and
Yeah.
this is, pretty much true cross-culturally, like culturally, I believe. But one of the things that is reiterated a lot in the culture that I'm learning is the practice of really like prayer and offerings
Mhm.
and sacrifice, again, not necessarily as in suffering, but as in it means something.
Mhm.
And so that jumped forward to me in your share that, that doing this inner work and this healing work can be challenging at times. And for me, I don't experience it as suffering, even though it's challenging. And what you just shared to me is a really beautiful example of what an offering actually is.
Mhm.
And that's all part of the prayer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if I that's kind of one of those moments too where it's like if I didn't trust my body, if I didn't have that connection with my body, I think for other people, and I as I remember it, I'm thinking other people that were in ceremony with me that night would not have been ready to hold something like that. It could have been incredibly traumatizing. So I'm so grateful that I had the connection with my body that I had, and that I was able to integrate that afterwards, which if I hadn't, things might have turned out differently in that experience. But I am grateful for the ability to offer that and to have that to offer back to the earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm curious if Shaman School helped you as a facilitator holding plant medicine or how it might have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it helped me in space holding in general. So in my coaching sessions or in my medicine circles. And I think all of that boils down to the confidence and trust that I have in myself. And I think I always had a little bit of this, but I think Shaman School just helped to provide permission to just kind of let it be what it is. I sometimes experience as I'm space holding. One of the things that you shared during Shaman School that I loved so much was a story about in a healing session you were holding, you just wanted to shake your hand. And it was like, what is it doing? And it's like, well, it just feels good. Like it just feels good and it feels right to do this with my hand. And I was like, oh yeah, that piece shows up a lot in my medicine ceremonies, in that sometimes I just need to do this thing with this thing. you know, I just need to go rattle with my rattle, or I need to just move my hand in this particular movement. And I don't always necessarily know why, or it doesn't need meaning. It just feels right. And I can just really trust that now a lot more than I could before.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
Mhm.
that makes me extra happy.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's such a clear sign of embodiment, right? Especially when
Yes.
we're talking about healers, whether you're holding plant medicine or not. I know for
Mhm.
me, spending a lot of time in the shamanic realm, there's a place where I think it's just awkward and people have to get through it, but there's a lot of like formula type approach to shamanic healing, and even just calling in the directions can be very formulaic. And
Mhm.
oftentimes I find people want to really be seen doing the thing, having the drum, having the rattle, being this, very spiritual person that's the guide that knows what's going on. And it's challenging because I find that oftentimes that scares people that actually do have a gift and actually are in integrity away, because they can sense the disconnect and they're afraid that they're that.
Mhm.
Or if they show up and move in a certain way, that's what they look like. And
Mhm.
it sounds like you have that clear distinction between the difference between moving your body because you think you're supposed to versus like just letting your body move itself because that's what's needed and that's
Yeah.
what you know how to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am typically very vulnerable and upfront with my participants that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing in those realms. And it's not that like I'm making it up or I'm pretending. It's that a lot of times I'm doing something and somebody will say, like, oh, that thing you did really helped me X, Y, and Z. And I think I always thought that healers and shamans could see what I needed. And then they did the thing. And now I'm recognizing it's much more of an embodied experience where I'm like, I didn't know that you needed to be fanned with this wing. Like I just got an energetic ping that that's what I was going to do next. And the fact that it helped you feels great for me. And I'm so grateful for that. And also, I didn't know. I didn't know you were experiencing being birthed out of a lava flow and that you needed to be cooled down. I couldn't see into your experience like that. I just did the thing that my body needed to do next.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I've often experienced one or the other, and more often both at the same time. I can feel, and I have a knowing on all of the cosmic levels what is rearranging, and also, right, I'm just moving my hand because it wants to move.
Yeah,
And both of those things are true.
absolutely. And completely valid.
So, kind of just backing up to your work, who, if somebody feels like they want to do some work on getting into their body or do some healing work around there, what should they know about you and your work?
I think about my work in general is that I the most important piece is that every human is capable of doing just that. Every human is capable of experiencing their body in this way. And again, it's not necessarily that it's going to be the easiest thing in the world, but I would be willing to bet money that it's easier and simpler than you think, and your body is more capable of it than you could ever possibly imagine. I have worked with people who were so concerned that they would not be able to do it. And in our very first or very second session, are experiencing full on journeys through their body. So I think that that's a core piece. And about me specifically is that I I love holding people through their shadow. The painful pieces, the uncomfortable pieces, the emotional pieces. It is something that I can't contain. It brings me joy, and it's not that I want to see you suffering. It's that it just lights up my soul to be able to hold space and to experience somebody crying for maybe the first time in years or decades. And I think that people recognize after the fact that it is such a healing moment to have that breaking point and to open their eyes and to see me smiling at them.
Mm.
Because it's just not a response that we get out in the natural world, to be able to experience our feelings authentically and to not be felt sorry for.
Mm.
And so I think that this is something that is not completely unique to me, but is something that is very special about how I hold this work.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. So Kate Tompkins is a shaman, a mentor, a medicine woman. Kate is in Austin. She specializes in helping women reconnect with their bodies and reclaim their sexuality through trauma-informed, tantra-based somatic coaching. She loves hiking. She loves pole dancing. And if you are watching the video version of that, you might see her cat Nellie wandering through the background. And Kate is offering the listeners a really beautiful offer. It is a free session with her. We're going to be sharing that link in the show notes here. And Kate, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your expertise and your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, if you want to get in touch with Kate, learn more about her work, we'll be sharing her links in the bio and the show notes, so you can learn a little bit more about her, about what awaits for you when you work with her, and how you can live a more embodied life. Have you been hearing the call to expand your spiritual gifts and step into your next level of conscious leadership? If you're a coach, healer, or a spiritual leader, you can learn more about Shaman School and growing your spiritual business on our website, holtonhealingarts.com, or send me a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Welcome to today's Q&A episode, where we explore questions about spiritual paths, intuitive gifts, growing a spiritual business, and shamanism. Do you have a question for us? Send us a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Another question from one of our Leading with Spirit private Facebook group users. And the question is, how do you do a soul retrieval? And unlike meditations, instead of telling a person what to do, you work with them directly to uncover the missing soul part. First, by getting clear on their intention and connecting to the spirit realm. Then locating the lost part, which includes what age, what happened, where the part went. And the shaman that you're working with should be able to see this for you or guide you there. The old way kind of had actually one of the ways that I was taught that's still powerful, but to me, it's a little outdated and not as empowering as the new method. The old method I learned was actually just to journey and ask to find their missing part, and then essentially reaching out into the spirit realm, grabbing it and then bringing it back and returning it into the person. And there was specific processes for that. Obviously, Sandra Ingerman was one of the biggest people who brought this forward. And the newer method has you as the practitioner basically guiding them through the process and uncovering the part, and helping them to see the things that they forgot. So once the age, where it went, what happened is clear, once that is clear, you can speak to the missing part of the soul or the missing soul part of the body, because that happens too, and heal it by helping it understand what it needs to know more about, or altering its perception of what happened and why, and then inviting it to return, making sure not to force it or rush it. The shaman would assist you in this process, a process that I teach in Shaman School. And it can be tricky because many of the missing parts are left usually because of trauma, big or small. Small traumas still count. So you'll need to be aware of that. You could also journey for yourself and ask to find the missing part and let the spirits help you from there. I'm a big fan of working with someone, especially on bigger issues, because a good practitioner will include you in the process and help you process the issue, so the part you retrieve stays with you and you can see the whole picture, and it's less likely to go back out again and then require you to retrieve it later on. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading with Spirit. If you did, please share the link for this episode with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Holton Healing Arts. It would also support me if you subscribed and left a rating and review of the show, so we can support more people living their highest purpose. Until next time, journey on.